Hello. Today we'll be looking at the influenza epidemic of 1918 in the Southwest, particularly in the state of Arizona.
These are the 6 different topics we will discuss involving the epidemic in the state of Arizona.
World War I played a key role in the influenza epidemic. The war was between 1914 and 1918. The reason why the war played a key role in the epidemic was because in the spring of 1918, military ships brought the deadly disease to the Americas. Influenza spread in the military from camp to camp throughout the spring and summer of 1918.
When civilians started to get infected, this began a national panic. The public saw influenza as the worst epidemic the country has ever dealt with, even deadlier than World War I. The public feared influenza because people could be fine in the morning and dead by night, and to show this photo is an obituary in Chicago from November. With the lack of medical staff, there was a lot of emphasis put on the public to take prevention methods to stop the spread of influenza. This ad was posted in New York, which shows them telling the public to do the 3 C's of clean mouth, skin, and clothes. They believed this to work because they believed the disease was spread through the air.
In order to understand the state as a whole, let's first look at a particular area in Arizona, Tucson. The Spanish influenza first started to appear in the state of Arizona, particularly Tucson, in early October 1918. This appearance would lead to a series of regulations that would impact the state for months to come.
On October 10, 1918, 24 cases of influenza were reported in the city of Tucson. The mayor of Tucson, O.C. Parker, issued an order closing the schools, churches, theaters, and all other places where people congregate in the city. A week later, with the number of cases spiking up, makeshift hospitals were set up for the sick.
A month later, on November 15th, the state fairs of Phoenix, Prescott, and Tucson were all canceled. The Indian Fair in Sacaton would also be canceled on the same day. This indicated that the disease was not just isolated in one city, but that many individuals are being impacted across different parts of the state.
On December 1st, 1918, it was decided that the quarantine of businesses from influenza would be lifted, but masks were still to be worn by the entire citizenry. Only schools were exempt from the order due to the spacing of the seating arrangements, and the children's biology supposedly prevented the spread of the disease.
On December 17th, 1918, 8 people were found guilty of not following the masking ordinance. The following day, a banker by the name of John Metz was arrested for not following the ordinance. In his appeal, he angrily expressed how other eastern cities did not follow the same ordinance, bringing into question the usefulness of masks in Tucson.
On December 21st, 1918, Judge Patty of Tucson decided that the enforcement of wearing masks was invalid because it represented class legislation. Considering school children were exempt from the masking order, it invalidated the ordinance overall. By Christmas Day, hardly anyone in the city was wearing a mask in public. Here we see a school reopening after the epidemic in Flagstaff in January 1919.
Throughout the time of the influenza epidemic in Arizona, there were a great deal of interesting stories that occurred. In November of 1918, counties in Arizona were commandeering bootleg whiskey and giving it to patients. This was considered a turning point of the influenza epidemic. Newspapers report that the flu had detrimental effects on people, including insanity. An Indian man killed his wife and children with an axe and then proceeded to commit suicide by hanging himself from a meat hook. It was believed he did this because of the negative effects the flu was having on the population.
While the flu was widespread around the United States, the epidemic of Arizona was important in the Southwest. Arizona was one of the first places to reach an epidemic level of the flu. Arizona, along with other southwestern states, prepared to mobilize their doctors and have them travel to treat others, stating that they were willing as a patriotic duty to serve in any of these states during the present epidemic of influenza. The flu's caused a great deal of public response among the population of Arizona.
The Santa Fe Railroad helped bring the Spanish influenza to Arizona in October of 1918. These 6 cities listed here had some of the first reports of the influenza, but soon the Santa Fe Railroad would bring the disease to Prescott and Jerome as well. In 1 week, the disease was reported statewide.
News outlets toned down the seriousness of the disease. Newspapers of the time reported that the influenza affecting Arizona was not nearly as bad as the one affecting the East Coast. For over 2 weeks, papers reported that there was no pandemic in the state and not to worry. As soldiers began moving from other base camps to Arizona and began to show signs of the influenza, officers were blaming civilians, even though it was proven that the soldiers were the ones bringing the disease into the state.
With little coverage of the Navajo population, little is known of how it affected this tribe during the epidemic of 1918. What is known is that over 2,000 Navajo in the Four Corners area of Arizona died from influenza from 1918 and 1919. Crowded conditions in Phoenix slums also caused the Mexican population to be greatly impacted by influenza as well.
The state soon sent out orders to wear masks in public at all times. With emphasis still on not to worry about disease, it seemed that the Arizona government during the time made it seem like covering your face would help our soldiers stay healthy and strong.
The Spanish influenza was terrifying for many people because it affected everyone, not just the old, weak, or poor. Even the healthiest of immune systems were affected and quickly killed by the disease. Seemingly healthy teenagers to mid-40-year-olds were at the greatest risk of the disease and could be healthy in the morning but dead by nightfall.
As the Spanish influenza began to cross the state, the public's small concern grew into anxiety that eventually turned into panic. Many began to flee cities, taking to more private and secure locations away from disease. Eventually, of course, the flu would become a distant memory for the people of Arizona.